Over 700 years ago, an entire fleet vanished without a trace, disappearing into the mist of history. Ships loaded with treasures, secret maps, and forbidden knowledge, gone. Some say it was a storm. Others whisper of a curse, or even revenge from a power they defied. But what really happened to the Templar fleet? Why did no trace remain? And who wanted their secrets buried forever? Tonight, we'll uncover the hidden truths that historians didn't dare reveal. The shocking secrets of the lost Templar fleet. By the end of this story, you'll wonder if some mysteries were meant to stay lost, or if someone still watches over them. It all began on a cold, misty morning in the early 14th century. The sea was restless that day, waves lashing at the wooden hulls of a fleet that should have been invisible in the fog. But it wasn't the weather that made this morning unforgettable. It was the fleet itself. The Templar fleet, a collection of ships carrying treasures, sacred artifacts, and secret maps, was preparing to sail on a journey that would change history forever. No one knew exactly how many ships there were. Some accounts say dozens, others hint at over 100. These were not ordinary vessels. They were armed, fast, and carrying some of the most powerful men of the time. Knights who had survived countless battles on land, now bound together by a secret mission across the seas. Their goal? Hidden even from many within their own order. The story I'm about to tell you begins with the fleet leaving the harbor. There was excitement in the air, but also tension. Whispers among the sailors hinted at dangers they didn't fully understand. Rumors of enemies who wanted the Templars' secrets, of kings who feared their power, and of unknown forces lurking beyond the horizon. But nothing could prepare anyone for what was about to happen. The first signs of trouble came as soon as they sailed past the coastline. A dense fog rolled in, thicker than anything anyone had seen before. It swallowed the ships, hiding them from view. The wind shifted suddenly, a strange silence replacing the usual sound of waves and seagulls. Men reported seeing shadows move across the water, though no other ships were nearby. Some thought it was nothing but their imagination, the anxiety of leaving home and family behind. Others weren't so sure. By the second day, strange events began to unfold. One ship, the flagship, started behaving oddly. Its compass spun without reason, and the stars above seemed unfamiliar. Navigators consulted their maps, but the charts no longer aligned with reality. Waves seemed to push the ships in directions the sailors didn't intend to go. Some whispered that the sea itself was rejecting them. Fear began to spread like wildfire. One of the oldest sailors aboard, a man named Jacques, tried to calm the others. "The sea has moods," he said, his voice trembling. "But this is not a mood. Something is wrong." Nobody wanted to hear him, but deep down, even the bravest knights felt a chill in their bones. They had faced storms before, but this felt different. Almost deliberate. As the days passed, strange occurrences multiplied. Supplies disappeared mysteriously, ropes would snap without reason, and sailors reported hearing voices in the fog. Some claimed to see figures walking across the water, only to vanish when approached. Panic began to set in, though no one admitted it openly. The fleet, once proud and confident, now moved like a ghost convoy, uncertain of its own path. Then, on the fifth night, something truly unexplainable happened. A massive light appeared on the horizon, glowing like fire but not burning. It hovered above the water, and the ships drew closer, entranced. Some men thought it was divine guidance, others suspected a trap. As they approached, a sudden gust of wind knocked over masts and tore sails. Chaos erupted, and when the men regained their senses, the light had vanished, and with it, one of the ships. Just gone. The disappearance was the first of many. Every day, another ship would vanish without a trace. No distress signals. No debris. Nothing to indicate what had happened. Those who remained were terrified. They whispered of curses, of divine wrath, or of enemies so powerful they could strike invisibly. Some believed the fleet had been swallowed by the sea itself. Others feared something far worse, that the Templar secrets they carried had made them targets of a force that didn't belong in this world. By the seventh day, only a few ships remained. The knights were exhausted, physically and mentally. Their discipline began to crumble. Arguments broke out, accusations were thrown, and trust dissolved. Yet, amid the fear and confusion, one thought haunted them more than anything. Why were they the only ones left? And then, just when hope seemed lost, the mist began to lift. The survivors believed they had finally emerged from the fog. But the sight that met them was unrecognizable. The coastline they expected was gone. Familiar landmarks were nowhere to be found. Instead, strange cliffs rose from the water, shrouded in mist, and the sea seemed unnaturally still. The fleet was no longer on any known map. They had sailed into an uncharted, isolated part of the ocean, and there was no way back. It was in that moment that the Templars realized something horrifying. They weren't just lost. They had entered a place where reality itself seemed altered. And the secrets they carried, the maps, the treasures, the knowledge of the Order, had painted a target on their backs, one that no human force could touch, but perhaps something else could. And that's where the story truly begins. Because everything the world thought it knew about the Templar fleet vanished along with them. No record survived, no shipwrecks were ever found, and the survivors who returned years later spoke only in whispers. What really happened to the fleet? Who or what was behind the disappearances? And why were the Templar secrets so dangerous that they could erase men, ships, and entire histories without leaving a trace? Tonight, we'll follow the journey of the fleet from the first day it sailed to the last ship that vanished. We'll uncover the hidden rules, revenge, and forbidden knowledge that surrounded them. And perhaps, just perhaps, we'll glimpse the truth behind one of history's most haunting mysteries, the lost Templar fleet. Because some secrets are too dangerous to be found. The survivors of the fleet were disoriented and exhausted. The once proud ships of the Templar Order, vessels that had carried treasures, sacred texts, and secrets of immense power, now floated like haunted shadows in an unfamiliar sea. The morning light broke over the misty horizon, but instead of comfort, it brought only a deeper sense of unease. Every sailor, every night, felt the silent weight of uncertainty pressing down. They had left the known world behind, and they had no idea what waited ahead. The first challenge was navigation. With their maps useless and compasses spinning without reason, the knights were forced to rely on instinct and experience, but even that seemed insufficient. Waves seemed to move against them, currents twisted unpredictably, and the stars above, once their guides, appeared unfamiliar, as if the heavens themselves had shifted. Conversations grew tense. Experienced navigators whispered among themselves, fear in their voices. We're no longer in the world we know. This isn't just the sea anymore. It's something else. Among the remaining men, one knight stood out, Sir Roland. He was seasoned, cautious, and deeply loyal to the Order. But even he was shaken. We've sailed too far, he admitted, too far from home, and the sea does not forgive mistakes. We must tread carefully. Every action now matters more than ever. His voice, though calm, betrayed an underlying panic. They all knew that mistakes had already cost them dearly. The fleet had been steadily disappearing, one ship at a time, without warning. The day wore on. Strange phenomena continued. Shadows appeared on the water, moving as though alive. Sailors reported whispers carried on the wind, voices speaking in languages they did not recognize. Some believed the voices were illusions, products of fear and exhaustion. But when one of the knights, a man named Bertrand, leaned over the railing to look at a shadow, he swore it lunged at him, before vanishing. The stories spread quickly, feeding the growing paranoia among the men. Fear, they realized, could be more dangerous than the sea itself. By the second night, the fleet had reduced to just a handful of ships. The survivors had begun to ration food and water, but supplies dwindled faster than expected. Morale was at an all-time low. Arguments broke out. Some accused others of stealing supplies or hoarding food. Some muttered that the Templar Order had somehow brought this upon them, that the very secrets they carried were cursed. The tension was unbearable, and every creak of the ship seemed louder than before, every wave more threatening. It was during this tense night that Sir Roland made a discovery. While inspecting the largest remaining ship, he found strange markings on the hull, symbols carved deeply into the wood, symbols that no sailor had made. They glowed faintly in the moonlight, pulsing as though alive. He called the others, and together they examined the carvings. No one could explain them. They resembled no language known to Europe, no writing from the Holy Land, nothing from the far reaches of the world. Some feared they were signs of a supernatural force. Others thought it might be a trap laid by an enemy, perhaps an order even older and more secret than the Templars themselves. Despite the fear, the men pressed on. Days turned into nights, and nights into days. Each sunrise brought new terrors. Fish that followed the ships were unnaturally large and silent, appearing only to disappear moments later. The wind changed without warning, sometimes propelling them forward, sometimes holding them still for hours. Sleep became nearly impossible. Dreams were haunted by visions of fire, water swallowing ships, and faceless figures pointing to the horizon. Many began to wonder if this journey was punishment, if the Templar fleet had angered some hidden power by carrying knowledge they should not have possessed. It was on the seventh day that the true horror revealed itself. A massive whirlpool appeared in the distance, enormous and dark, spinning with a force that no human-built ship could resist. The knights tried to steer away, but currents pulled them inexorably toward it. Waves climbed like mountains, smashing against the sides of the ships. Screams filled the air as men clung to anything that could keep them upright. In the chaos, one more ship was claimed by the sea. There was no time to mourn. The whirlpool vanished as suddenly as it appeared, leaving behind only calm water, and an emptiness that was far more frightening than the storm itself. After that day, the fleet sailed in near silence. Each survivor was lost in thought, haunted by the events they could not explain. They no longer talked about the missing ships. They no longer argued over rations. Every man feared that speaking might draw the attention of whatever force was watching them. Sir Roland gathered the remaining knights and sailors for a council. "We must keep moving," he said, his voice firm, "but carefully. Every course we set now must be measured. The sea will test us, and only those who remain united will survive." But unity was fragile. Fear, exhaustion, and the weight of the unknown had begun to erode discipline. At night, whispers of mutiny began to circulate. Some wanted to turn back, though they had no idea where back was. Others insisted they press forward, driven by pride, by loyalty to the Templar Order, or by the stubborn belief that they could reclaim what had already been lost. Sir Roland knew that the tension could explode at any moment, and he feared that internal conflict might be just as deadly as the unknown forces surrounding them. In the days that followed, a pattern became clear. Each ship that remained seemed to experience events differently. Some ships were plagued by whispers, others by strange lights on the water. Some saw figures walking atop the waves. Others saw nothing at all. It was as if the sea, or whatever controlled it, was targeting each ship individually, testing them in ways no human could predict. The survivors began to realize that their journey was no longer about finding land or completing a mission. It was about surviving something beyond comprehension. And yet, amid the fear, a glimmer of hope emerged. Sir Roland discovered a fragment of an old map, hidden in a chest thought empty. The markings suggested a distant island, one not charted on any known map, where it seemed the Templars might find refuge, or perhaps answers. Could this be salvation, or another trap? The men argued, hesitant but desperate. Every option carried risk, every decision might be their last. That night, as the fleet sailed under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars, silence fell over the remaining ships. Men stared at the water, listening to the gentle lapping of waves, wondering if it was safe to breathe. None dared speak of the future. The past, the vanished ships, the strange markings, the mysterious whirlpools, loomed too large in their minds. But one thing was certain. They were far from home, far from safety, and far from understanding the full scope of the forces that had claimed the Templar fleet. The survivors did not know it yet, but the journey ahead would test them in ways they could never imagine. Secrets would be revealed, alliances strained, and the truth about the Templar fleet, and the forbidden knowledge it carried, would push them to the edge of human endurance. By the time the first light of dawn appeared, the fleet had disappeared into the fog once again. The mystery of the lost Templar fleet deepened, and the surviving knights realized that there was no turning back. Whatever force watched them, whatever curse or vengeance lay ahead, it had already begun its work, and the secrets they carried were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The fog lifted just enough to reveal a shadowy outline on the horizon, a jagged line that could only be land. The knights and sailors aboard the remaining ships froze, eyes straining through the morning haze. After weeks at sea, after surviving whirlpools, vanishing ships, and strange lights in the water, this glimpse of the unknown brought a mixture of hope and dread. Could this island hold answers? Or another trap? Sir Roland ordered the fleet to approach carefully. Every sailor moved with cautious precision, knowing how quickly disaster could strike. The wind was calm, almost too calm, and the water reflected the cliffs like a mirror, still and silent. No birds flew overhead. No animals stirred. It was as if the island itself held its breath, waiting for them. As they drew closer, details began to emerge. The cliffs were steep, jagged rocks rising from the sea, blackened as though burned by fire long ago. At their base, small caves and inlets hinted at hidden passages, some perhaps large enough to shelter entire ships. The landscape was unlike anything the men had ever seen. No signs of villages, no visible paths, and certainly no people. And yet, something felt alive. Every creak of a ship, every whisper of the wind, seemed amplified, as though the island was listening. The first to set foot on the shore were the scouts, men chosen for their agility and courage. They landed in silence, scanning the beaches and cliffs. What they found was astonishing. Markings carved into the rock, symbols eerily similar to those found on the flagship weeks earlier. The glowing inscriptions pulsed faintly in the shadowed light. Sir Roland, standing at the waterline, traced the carvings with his fingers, feeling the grooves as though they held the memory of an ancient force. "These symbols," he whispered, "they're not just warnings, they're a map. A path. But to what?" The men debated what to do. Some argued they should leave immediately, fearing traps or curses. Others believed they were being guided here for a reason, that the island might hold the remaining Templar treasures, perhaps even the answers to why the fleet had vanished. After tense discussion, Sir Roland decided they would explore, but in small, cautious groups. They would leave markers and never stray too far from the others. The first group, carrying torches and weapons, ventured inland. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the scent of salt, earth, and something else, something faintly metallic and old. Every footstep echoed unnaturally. Strange shapes seemed to flicker at the edges of their vision, but whenever they turned, nothing was there. One sailor, trembling, whispered that he thought he heard distant chanting, low and resonant, in a language he did not recognize. Others dismissed it as wind, though even they felt unease gnawing at their resolve. After hours of careful exploration, the group discovered a cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall. The water cascaded down in a silvery curtain, almost hiding the opening entirely. Beyond it, darkness stretched deep into the rock. Torchlight revealed walls covered in intricate carvings, depictions of ships, battles, and strange celestial symbols. In some places, figures were shown holding objects that resembled the very artifacts the Templar fleet carried. Scrolls, chests, and swords engraved with cryptic markings. Sir Roland felt a chill. This is not just a hiding place," he said quietly. "It's a record. A monument to something. Someone. And they knew we would find it." The deeper they went into the cave, the more the carvings seemed to tell a story. One of power, betrayal, and vengeance. Figures with cloaked faces handed objects to others. Secret exchanges of knowledge too potent for ordinary men to wield. Battles raged across seas, just as they themselves had endured. And everywhere, the carvings emphasized secrecy, hidden rules, and punishment for those who betrayed the order. It became clear that the Templar fleet had not merely vanished randomly. The survivors began to suspect that the island itself, or whatever forces controlled it, had a purpose. Perhaps the fleet had been led here intentionally, as a test. And perhaps only those who could understand and respect the secrets of the Order would survive. The cave seemed to pulse with silent intelligence, as if aware of their every movement. That night, Sir Roland gathered the remaining knights around a small fire at the cave entrance. The men were weary, voices low and tense. They spoke in whispers of the ships lost, of men swallowed by the sea, and of the impossible phenomena they had witnessed. And yet, despite exhaustion and fear, there was determination in their eyes. They had survived when so many had disappeared. They had reached the island. And now, perhaps, they were closer than ever to uncovering the truth. But sleep was uneasy. Dreams that night were haunted by visions of water swallowing ships, shadowy figures reaching out, and flames reflecting off dark stone. Some men awoke screaming, convinced that shadows had moved in the corners of their cave. Others reported hearing footsteps behind them, though no one was there. By morning, the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Sir Roland, though firm and resolute, admitted privately that he had never felt so vulnerable. The next day, they pressed deeper into the cave. Passageways twisted unnaturally, opening into chambers filled with artifacts and relics. Some items were clearly ceremonial, others practical. Scrolls written in unknown languages, chests with locks that no key could open, and statues that seemed almost lifelike. Every discovery increased both fascination and fear. It was as if they had stumbled upon a place deliberately designed to be incomprehensible to ordinary minds. A sanctuary, perhaps, or a prison for knowledge too dangerous to share. As they explored, they noticed patterns in the carvings and symbols. They depicted cycles, of ships departing and never returning, of men tested and judged. One night, a scholar of the Order realized the markings mirrored events the fleet itself had endured. The vanishing ships, the whirlpools, the strange lights. The island was not just a hiding place. It was a mirror of their journey, a trap and a lesson in one. And then, in the deepest chamber, they discovered something that silenced every man present. In a stone alcove, guarded by carved figures with blank, faceless heads, lay a chest ornate, covered in symbols that seemed to shift when looked at from different angles. It was unlike anything the Templars had ever carried. It radiated a sense of power, of knowledge, and of danger. Sir Roland approached cautiously, heart pounding. The chest was clearly meant to be opened, but the carvings warned of consequences. He hesitated. "This is what the fleet carried," he whispered. "This is why they vanished. Whatever is inside, it could destroy us, or it could explain everything." The knights exchanged anxious glances. They knew that opening it was risky, but curiosity, and perhaps desperation, outweighed fear. They had come this far. And now, at the heart of the island, the truth of the lost Templar fleet was within reach. And yet, even as Sir Roland lifted the chest's lid, a shadow fell across the chamber. Something moved in the darkness, something that had been watching since the moment they arrived. The air grew colder, and a whisper echoed across the stone walls, words no man could understand, yet every man felt them in his bones. The island had waited for them, and it was not pleased. The story of the Templar fleet had led them here, but the final truth, the secret that had cost so many their lives, was still beyond reach. And the survivors realized a terrifying fact: understanding the secret might not save them. It might be the very thing that claimed them next. The chamber was silent except for the sound of the men's breathing. The chest sat before them, carved with symbols that seemed alive under the flickering torchlight. Sir Roland's hands hovered over the lid, trembling slightly, not from fear of what might be inside, but from the weight of responsibility. Every man in the room understood the unspoken truth. The contents of this chest had likely caused the disappearance of the entire Templar fleet. The first thing that struck him was the smell, a mix of aged wood, earth, and something faintly metallic. As he eased the lid open, a soft glow emerged, illuminating the faces of the knights. Inside lay artifacts unlike any they had ever seen. Scrolls of unknown origin, engraved swords, small reliquaries containing relics wrapped in gold and silver filigree, and instruments that resembled navigational tools but with strange markings. Each item radiated a sense of power, of knowledge too vast for ordinary men to hold. Bertrand, who had been at Sir Roland's side since the fleet departed, leaned forward, his eyes wide. These are the secrets of the Order," he whispered. "But they're different, dangerous." Sir Roland nodded, examining a scroll carefully. The writing was indecipherable at first glance, but the patterns suggested diagrams of the stars, complex calculations, and maps unlike any they had seen before. One symbol in particular caught his eye, a spiral that seemed to move as he stared at it, drawing him in, almost hypnotic. He pulled back abruptly. "This isn't just a chest of knowledge," he said quietly. "It's a test. A warning. Whoever possessed these secrets wielded power beyond comprehension." The knights debated what to do. Some argued to leave everything untouched, fearing curses or hidden traps. Others insisted that they study the items, that perhaps understanding them could save them from the fate that had claimed the other ships. Fear and curiosity battled within every man. They had survived storms, vanishing ships, and strange forces, but the unknown inside this chest was unlike anything they had faced before. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the cave. The torches flickered, and shadows danced across the walls. The men froze. The rumble grew louder, almost like distant footsteps or a chant, though no one was there. The symbols on the chest seemed to glow brighter, pulsating in rhythm with the sound. A cold wind swept through the chamber, carrying whispers that no one could understand, yet every man felt their meaning deep in his bones. Fear gripped the group like a living thing. "Step back," Sir Roland commanded, drawing his sword. "Whatever is here is not pleased." The men obeyed reluctantly, but the temptation was too great. Curiosity gnawed at them. Slowly, they began to examine the contents of the chest in small groups, handling the scrolls, the relics, the instruments. Each item seemed to tell a story. One scroll depicted the fleet's journey, with every ship represented in intricate detail. But here was something unnerving. The missing ships were drawn as fading shadows, disappearing into a dark spiral, eerily similar to the symbol Sir Roland had noticed. It became clear that the fleet's disappearance was not random. The ships had been drawn into something beyond the natural world, perhaps a curse, or a force older than any human power. Some knights speculated that the Templars themselves had created the devices to protect their secrets, while others believed that an external force had claimed the fleet in retribution for the knowledge they carried. Whatever the explanation, the truth was frightening. The secrets of the Templar fleet were deadly. As night fell, tension among the men increased. Whispers of mutiny began again, this time not about supplies, but about whether they should continue exploring. Some feared that handling the chest's contents had awakened the same force that had claimed the other ships. Others insisted they were Templars, bound by oath to uncover truth and protect knowledge. Arguments grew heated. Sir Roland had to remind the men that unity was their only chance of survival, but even his authority was tested by the palpable fear in the room. Then, as if on cue, the symbols on the chest shimmered and shifted. The room's temperature dropped dramatically. One of the knights, a young scribe named Henri, reached to touch a scroll, and the chest emitted a sound, a low hum that resonated through the stone walls. The symbols glowed brighter, forming patterns in the air like a constellation. Henri staggered back, eyes wide. "It's alive," he whispered. "It's watching us." Sir Roland knew in that moment that their worst fears were real. The chest was not merely a container, it was a guardian, a sentinel. And it had been waiting for centuries for someone to arrive, someone worthy, or perhaps someone foolish enough, to open it. The energy in the room was almost tangible, pressing against their chests, making it hard to breathe. Each man felt the weight of history, of power, and of unseen judgment. Suddenly, a vision appeared before them, flickering like a ghostly projection. A figure in a hooded cloak, face hidden, raised a hand, and the sea appeared behind them. Ships vanished into whirlpools, storms raged, and the Templar knights of old were shown receiving warnings and curses. Then the figure pointed directly at the surviving men. The message was unmistakable: The same fate could be theirs if they were unwise. Sir Roland took a deep breath, steadying himself. He understood now that their journey had never been about reaching land. It had been a test, a confrontation with forces beyond comprehension, forces that demanded respect, intelligence, and caution. They were being judged. And the chest, with its secrets, was the key. Hours passed as they studied the items cautiously, piecing together fragments of knowledge, attempting to understand the symbols, and trying to discern which path the Templars had intended for them. Slowly, they realized that some of the scrolls detailed navigational techniques far beyond conventional maps, instructions for hidden routes across seas and through storms, and even warnings about currents and whirlpools that had swallowed the fleet. Other items hinted at alliances with unseen powers, perhaps entities older than humanity itself, guardians of knowledge that the Templars had both revered and feared. By dawn, the men had reached a tentative understanding. They knew enough to continue their journey, but the lessons came with a heavy cost. Handling the chest had left them drained, both physically and mentally. Some fell asleep immediately, while others stood guard, their eyes never leaving the chest. Sir Roland, though exhausted, could not rest. He felt the weight of leadership heavier than ever. The Templar fleet had been lost for centuries, and now they were on the brink of either reclaiming its secrets, or meeting the same fate. And so, the survivors prepared to leave the chamber, the chest carefully secured. The whispers had stopped for the moment, but the memory of the vision lingered in their minds. Every man understood the unspoken rule. Knowledge came at a price. Every action, every choice, could determine whether they survived, or vanished like the rest of the fleet. As they stepped back into the dim corridors of the island, a chill ran down their spines. Outside, the sun rose over jagged cliffs, illuminating the restless sea beyond. Somewhere out there, the forces that had swallowed the fleet watched and waited. And in the shadows, the chest pulsed faintly, as though aware that its guardians had awakened after centuries of silence. The journey was far from over. The chest had revealed only part of the truth, and the island held far more secrets than they could imagine. The surviving Templars knew one thing with certainty. The forces that had claimed their brothers were still at work. And if they were not careful, they too could vanish, leaving only whispers of their existence for future generations to wonder about. Some feared that handling the chest's contents had awakened the same force that had claimed the other ships. Others insisted they were Templars, bound by oath to uncover truth and protect knowledge. Arguments grew heated. Sir Roland had to remind the men that unity was their only chance of survival, but even his authority was tested by the palpable fear in the room. Then, as if on cue, the symbols on the chest shimmered and shifted. The room's temperature dropped dramatically. One of the knights, a young scribe named Henri, reached to touch a scroll, and the chest emitted a sound, a low hum that resonated through the stone walls. The symbols glowed brighter, forming patterns in the air like a constellation. Henri staggered back, eyes wide. "It's alive," he whispered. "It's watching us." Sir Roland knew in that moment that their worst fears were real. The chest was not merely a container, it was a guardian, a sentinel. And it had been waiting for centuries for someone to arrive, someone worthy, or perhaps someone foolish enough, to open it. The energy in the room was almost tangible, pressing against their chests, making it hard to breathe. Each man felt the weight of history, of power, and of unseen judgment. Suddenly, a vision appeared before them, flickering like a ghostly projection. A figure in a hooded cloak, face hidden, raised a hand, and the sea appeared behind them. Ships vanished into whirlpools, storms raged, and the Templar knights of old were shown receiving warnings and curses. Then the figure pointed directly at the surviving men. The message was unmistakable. The same fate could be theirs if they were unwise. Sir Roland took a deep breath, steadying himself. He understood now that their journey had never been about reaching land. It had been a test, a confrontation with forces beyond comprehension, forces that demanded respect, intelligence, and caution. They were being judged. And the chest, with its secrets, was the key. Hours passed as they studied the items cautiously, piecing together fragments of knowledge, attempting to understand the symbols, and trying to discern which path the Templars had intended for them. Slowly, they realized that some of the scrolls detailed navigational techniques far beyond conventional maps, instructions for hidden routes across seas and through storms, and even warnings about currents and whirlpools that had swallowed the fleet. Other items hinted at alliances with unseen powers, perhaps entities older than humanity itself, guardians of knowledge that the Templars had both revered and feared. By dawn, the men had reached a tentative understanding. They knew enough to continue their journey, but the lessons came with a heavy cost. Handling the chest had left them drained, both physically and mentally. Some fell asleep immediately, while others stood guard, their eyes never leaving the chest. Sir Roland, though exhausted, could not rest. He felt the weight of leadership heavier than ever. The Templar fleet had been lost for centuries, and now they were on the brink of either reclaiming its secrets, or meeting the same fate. And so, the survivors prepared to leave the chamber, the chest carefully secured. The whispers had stopped for the moment, but the memory of the vision lingered in their minds. Every man understood the unspoken rule. Knowledge came at a price. Every action, every choice, could determine whether they survived, or vanished like the rest of the fleet. As they stepped back into the dim corridors of the island, a chill ran down their spines. Outside, the sun rose over jagged cliffs, illuminating the restless sea beyond. Somewhere out there, the forces that had swallowed the fleet watched and waited. And in the shadows, the chest pulsed faintly, as though aware that its guardians had awakened after centuries of silence. The journey was far from over. The chest had revealed only part of the truth, and the island held far more secrets than they could imagine. The surviving Templars knew one thing with certainty: the forces that had claimed their brothers were still at work. And if they were not careful, they too could vanish, leaving only whispers of their existence for future generations to wonder about. The dawn broke with a muted glow over the jagged cliffs of the island. The surviving Templar knights, weary from their encounter with the chest, emerged from the cave slowly, feeling the weight of the previous night's revelations pressing on them. Every man was silent, contemplating the visions, the glowing symbols, and the whispers that seemed to echo in their minds even now. No one spoke of fear. To acknowledge it aloud might give it power. But each heart thumped in quiet terror. Sir Roland led the small group to the edge of the cliffs overlooking the sea. The waves crashed against blackened rocks below, as if reminding them of the relentless forces that had already claimed most of the fleet. From this vantage point, they could see the remnants of their own ships, now small and fragile, bobbing in the water like fragile toys in a vast, unknowable expanse. Every glance reminded them of the missing men and the ships that had vanished into the unknown. And yet, beneath the despair was a flicker of determination. They had survived, and they would not be claimed so easily. But the island had its own designs. As they explored further, subtle signs of activity began to emerge. Footprints in sand that appeared and disappeared without explanation, faint scorch marks along the rock faces, and carvings that seemed newly etched despite the centuries-old stone. The Templars realized with mounting horror that the island was not passive. It had been waiting for them, alive in ways they could not yet comprehend. The symbols were not mere decorations. They were warnings, tests, and perhaps guardians of secrets too dangerous for ordinary men to possess. It was during this exploration that they first encountered the island's guardians. At first, they were just shadows at the edge of perception, forms that moved with impossible speed, blending seamlessly with the rocks and mist. Then, the shapes solidified, figures clad in robes darker than the shadows around them, faces hidden beneath hoods. They moved silently, yet with purpose, circling the Templars, observing without aggression at first. Sir Roland instinctively drew his sword, motioning for the others to stay calm. The guardians made no sound, but the air seemed charged, vibrating with a power that made their skin tingle. Bertrand, ever cautious, whispered, "They're not human. And they're not hostile. Yet." The knights proceeded slowly, trying to communicate. The guardians seemed to respond to gestures rather than words, and the Templars began to understand a grim truth. The island itself was alive, its forces both intelligent and ancient. It was not merely a place to hide the secrets of the fleet. It was a living entity that had been waiting for the day when humans, reckless enough to open the chest, would arrive. And now, they were under observation, tested for their wisdom, courage, and loyalty. As the hours passed, the Templars discovered small altars scattered throughout the cliffs, stone pedestals engraved with the same symbols found on the chest and throughout the cave. On each pedestal rested an artifact, a dagger, a scroll, a small carved figure, or a key-like instrument. Each seemed to pulse faintly with energy, as if alive. Sir Roland approached one of the altars cautiously and touched the artifact, feeling a jolt that traveled through his body. He staggered back, breathless. It was as if the island itself had reached into him, testing his resolve, probing his intentions. One of the younger knights, Henri, reached to take a small scroll. Instantly, the shadows shifted. The guardians moved closer, circling with precision, and the symbols on the surrounding stones glowed with an unearthly light. Henri froze, realizing that the island's reaction was immediate and intelligent. Sir Roland placed a hand on his shoulder, warning him to release the scroll, and the tension in the air slowly eased, but only slightly. They had understood a critical lesson. The secrets they sought came with rules, and breaking them could invite immediate retribution. That night, the Templars set up a temporary camp near a sheltered cliffside. They were exhausted, their minds racing with the implications of what they had seen. The Guardians remained at a distance, shadows on the horizon, silent yet ever watchful. The darkness lingered over the plateau as the knights stood around the glowing altar, their breaths visible in the cold, damp air. Each man felt the weight of centuries pressing down on them. The Templar fleet had vanished here long ago, and every instinct told them that the island was watching, judging, not just their bodies, but their minds, their courage, and their hearts. Sir Roland's grip tightened on his sword, but he knew the weapon offered no real protection here. This trial was not of steel or strength. It was of wisdom, restraint, and understanding. Sir Roland studied the altar closely. The carvings glowed faintly, pulsating in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Symbols depicted scenes of the past, ships sailing into storms, men holding chests and scrolls, and shadows that swallowed the unwary. Some figures stood strong, others collapsed under invisible forces. The message was clear: knowledge came with rules, and ignoring them could bring ruin. Bertrand, ever cautious, whispered, "We need to proceed carefully. One wrong move, and we could be the next fleet lost to this place." The knights deliberated, trying to understand what the island demanded. The altar had 3 distinct sections, one for offerings, one for study, and one for action. The carvings suggested a sequence: first observe, then offer, then act. Mistakes had consequences. The men realized this was the first test. The altar would reward insight and punish recklessness. Sir Roland carefully placed the chest a few feet away, signaling to the others to keep their distance. Then he gestured toward the offerings section. Small stones, shells, and trinkets were available, but the carvings indicated that only something of true value, a symbol of dedication or loyalty, would satisfy the altar. One of the knights, a younger man named Henri, stepped forward, placing a simple silver ring he had kept as a token of his oath to the order. The symbols on the altar pulsed brighter for a moment, then dimmed. A soft vibration hummed through the stone beneath their feet. Encouraged, the others followed. Each knight offered something personal: a lock of hair, a small amulet, a blade engraved with his family crest. The altar seemed to accept the offerings cautiously, glowing brighter with each item, yet never fully revealing its power. Sir Roland realized that the trial was not just about bravery. It was about sincerity, intention, and respect for the forces at work. Once the offerings were complete, the second stage began: observation and understanding. The carvings shifted subtly, revealing patterns and sequences previously hidden. Lines connected symbols, suggesting that knowledge was not to be taken at face value. Some of the symbols corresponded to celestial alignments, others to the movement of currents and tides, and others to moral decisions, acts of courage, loyalty, and wisdom. Sir Roland traced the lines with his fingers, guiding the men as they deciphered the hidden meaning. Slowly, The altar responded. Faint lights traced the paths of the carvings, showing routes and instructions that would allow them to navigate the island safely, and perhaps even escape its hidden dangers. The men realized that the island was teaching them, offering guidance, but only to those who paid careful attention, who respected the rules embedded in the symbols. As they worked, the shadows at the edge of the plateau moved closer. The Guardians had been watching, and their presence was a reminder that any mistake could be fatal. Sir Roland spoke in low tones, urging calm and focus. The men's hands shook as they handled the ancient instruments and scrolls, aware that the island was testing their comprehension, patience, and ability to work together. The final stage of the trial required action. The carvings now indicated a sequence to activate a mechanism within the altar itself. A stone panel shifted, revealing a slot into which the correct combination of offerings and items from the chest could be placed. Sir Roland hesitated. One misstep could trigger unknown consequences. He studied the symbols carefully, consulting Bertrand and Henri, making sure every placement matched the sequence suggested by the carvings. With deliberate movements, the chest's contents and the offerings were positioned. The moment the final piece was set in place, the altar responded. A deep hum reverberated through the plateau, and a soft, ethereal light filled the area. The Guardians moved back slightly, observing without interference. A part of the stone surface slid open, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the altar. Inside was a scroll, ancient and fragile, its markings glowing faintly. Sir Roland carefully unrolled it, revealing a map unlike any he had seen before. It depicted not just the island, but a path through the seas that seemed impossible to navigate with ordinary skill. Whirlpools, storms, and hidden currents were marked, along with cryptic symbols indicating safe passage. There were also warnings, symbols denoting consequences for disobedience, for greed, and for arrogance. It was clear that the knowledge of the Templar fleet had been preserved here, but only for those deemed worthy by the island. The men stared in awe, realizing the magnitude of what they had uncovered. This was the secret that had eluded countless sailors and knights over centuries. The Templar fleet had vanished because it had failed to understand the rules, to respect the forces at work, and to navigate with wisdom. And now the surviving knights had succeeded where others had failed, not through strength alone, but through patience, observation, and integrity. Yet the victory was tempered by caution. The Guardians had watched every step, and though they had not intervened lethally, their presence was a warning. The island demanded constant respect. Knowledge came with consequences, and the scroll they now possessed would not protect them from mistakes or hubris. As the knights rested near the altar, Sir Roland reflected on the journey so far. They had survived storms, whirlpools, vanishing ships, and the island's mysterious guardians. They had faced the chest of secrets, learned to read its symbols, and now had passed the first trial of the altars. But the path ahead was far from safe. The island still held mysteries, dangers, and tests, and the forces that had claimed the majority of the Templar fleet were not yet done with them. In the quiet moments before dawn, the knights realized the truth. Knowledge alone was not enough. Understanding, discipline, and respect for the rules were essential. The Templar fleet had failed because it had underestimated the power it carried. They had survived because they had listened, observed, and followed the path laid out for them. But the island's challenges were only beginning, and each step forward would demand greater courage, sharper minds, and unwavering loyalty. The first trial had ended, but the journey had only just begun. Beyond the plateau, deeper into the island, lay new chambers, new altars, and new secrets waiting to test the survivors. The Templar fleet had vanished here once. The surviving knights understood that any misstep could claim them as well. And somewhere in the shadows, the island's guardians watched, ever vigilant, ensuring that the rules were obeyed and that the secrets of the lost Templar fleet remained both powerful and dangerous. The Templar knights had survived their first trial, and the weight of victory pressed heavily upon them. But the island offered no respite. The first light of dawn revealed a landscape more treacherous than the plateau they had just crossed. Jagged cliffs rising like teeth from the earth, dense forests where sunlight barely penetrated, and strange mists curling around roots and stones. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, vibrating as if the island were alive, aware, and patient. Sir Roland gathered the remaining knights for a quiet council. "The first trial is behind us," he said, his voice steady but low. "But the island is far from done testing us. Every step forward will demand caution, insight, and unity. Remember this. The Templar fleet was lost because it failed to understand the rules. We must not." Bertrand nodded, scanning the dense undergrowth. "The Guardians are always watching. Their silence is not mercy, it's preparation. We have survived so far because we learned to listen, to observe, and to respect. That must continue." Their path led them into a forest unlike any other. The trees were ancient, their trunks thick and gnarled, and their branches stretched high into the mist. Strange luminescent fungi clung to roots, casting an eerie glow across the forest floor. Every step seemed amplified, each sound echoing as if the island itself were speaking. Shadows flickered between the trunks, teasing the corners of their vision. It was impossible to tell if they were natural or conjured by some unseen force. As they ventured deeper, the forest began to challenge them in unexpected ways. Paths twisted and shifted, familiar landmarks disappeared, and whispers carried through the trees, soft, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. Some knights swore they could hear voices of the lost fleet, men calling out in desperation, warning, or perhaps begging for mercy. Henri clutched his chest at one such whisper, convinced that a shipmate from weeks before had spoken. Sir Roland placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, urging him to remain calm. But the effect was undeniable. The forest preyed on their memories, fears, and guilt. It became apparent that this was the second trial, not of strength or skill, but of resolve. The island wanted them to confront the past, to understand why the Templar fleet had vanished and to resist the fear that had doomed so many. Every hallucination, every whisper, every shifting shadow was a test of mental fortitude. A single lapse in concentration could lead a man astray, and the island would claim him as it had claimed the rest. Hours passed, and the forest grew denser. The knights began noticing symbols carved into the bark of the trees, similar to those on the chest and altars. But these symbols were different. They depicted scenes of failure, betrayal, and despair. One tree showed a knight clutching a chest while shadows rose behind him, consuming his ship. Another depicted men arguing, dividing their strength, and vanishing into darkness. Each image reinforced the same message. Unity, courage, and obedience were essential. The Templar fleet had failed because it had fractured under pressure. They must not. As they moved cautiously, the shadows intensified. Shapes formed between the trunks, figures that mirrored their own appearances, but distorted and ghostly. The knights froze, realizing that the forest was forcing them to confront themselves. Doubts, fears, and hidden insecurities manifested as these shadows, testing not just their courage, but their self-awareness. Some men stumbled, their hearts racing, nearly collapsing under the weight of fear. Sir Roland forced himself forward, calling out to guide them through the illusions. Then, a sudden sound, a chorus of whispers, filled the forest, rising to an almost deafening volume. The knights covered their ears, but the whispers persisted. Amid the cacophony, words became discernible. Warnings, regrets, and even accusations. The forest was demanding recognition of the past, a confession of mistakes, and an acknowledgement of the price of power. The knights understood that ignoring the lessons of history could be fatal. At the forest's heart, they discovered a clearing, where a massive stone circle lay partially buried under moss and roots. Within it, the shadows of the past took solid form, coalescing into ghostly images of the vanished Templar fleet. Ships and knights appeared, replaying the moments before their disappearance. Waves consumed vessels, whirlpools dragged men into the abyss, and the hooded figure from the chest's vision appeared, gesturing in silent warning. The knights watched in silent horror, recognizing that this was the moment their predecessors had failed, the same moment that had claimed hundreds of men centuries before. Sir Roland stepped forward, realizing that this trial demanded more than observation. The island was testing their courage, decisiveness, and ability to act with wisdom. He instructed the men to place their hands on the stone circle in unison, a gesture of solidarity and respect. As they did, a low vibration pulsed through the ground. The ghostly images froze, and the whispers quieted to a low hum. The knights felt the pressure in the air ease slightly, as if the island acknowledged their commitment. Henri, trembling but resolute, spoke softly. "We do not fear the past. We respect it. We will learn from it." The words seemed to resonate through the clearing. The shadows shifted, dissolving into mist, leaving behind only the stone circle and the eerie glow of luminescent fungi. The knights realized that they had passed the second trial, not through strength, but through courage, unity, and acknowledgement of the forces that had consumed the fleet. The island had accepted their resolve, but it had also reminded them of the cost of failure. As they prepared to move deeper into the island, Sir Roland reflected on the lessons learned. The Templar fleet had been lost not just to storms or the sea, but to their own failings, fear, disunity, and disregard for the powers they carried. The surviving knights now understood that their journey was not simply about reclaiming lost knowledge. It was about mastering themselves, following the rules embedded in the island's tests, and respecting the unseen forces that govern this place. But even as they stepped forward, a new awareness settled over them. The island still held chambers, altars, and secrets that had yet to be revealed. And the guardians, those silent, shadowed figures, watched their every move. The whispers had ceased for now, but the forest's lesson remained. Knowledge was power, but power demanded obedience. One misstep, one lapse of courage, and the price could be death. The knights pressed onward, their senses heightened, their minds alert, aware that the third trial awaited, and that it would be even more dangerous, testing not just their intellect and courage, but their moral judgment, their loyalty, and their willingness to confront truths more terrifying than any storm or whirlpool. The lost Templar fleet had vanished here, and the surviving knights knew that to succeed, they would have to navigate not only the island but the very human weaknesses that had doomed their predecessors. The forest behind them faded into mist as the surviving Templar knights approached the heart of the island. Unlike the jagged cliffs or shadowed forests, this place seemed unnaturally still. No wind stirred the foliage, no birds cried overhead. Even the ocean beyond the cliffs appeared muted, as if the island had absorbed the world's noise, leaving only silence and the weight of expectation. Sir Roland led the group cautiously, aware that every step forward was a test. The first two trials had demanded courage, observation, and respect for the unseen forces, but whispers in the air suggested that the third trial would be far more dangerous. The Guardians had remained mostly passive, shadowed observers, until now. From the edge of the mist, shapes emerged, tall, silent, moving with a precision that defied human speed. Their presence was an unspoken warning. The trial ahead would push them to the limits of body, mind, and spirit. The path led to a massive stone structure partially hidden by the mist. Its entrance was framed with intricate carvings depicting ships consumed by storms, men kneeling before hooded figures, and symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. A sense of ancient power radiated from the stones, as though the structure had existed before the first Templars had set sail. Sir Roland felt a chill. This is the heart of the island," he murmured. "Whatever we find inside, it will determine our fate." Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic. Torches flickered against walls covered in symbols, some matching those found on the chest, the altars, and the forest. Others were new, depictions of human figures in impossible positions, abstract shapes suggesting knowledge too vast for ordinary understanding. The knights realized that the structure itself was a puzzle, and navigating it would require careful thought, courage, and unity. At the center of the chamber lay a circular pit, shrouded in shadow. A faint hum emanated from its depths, vibrating through the floor, through their boots, and into their bones. The Guardians positioned themselves along the chamber's perimeter, silent but unmistakably alert. Sir Roland approached the edge of the pit, peering into the darkness. The bottom was obscured, but occasional glimpses of objects, ships, chests, scrolls, floated in the shadows, as though the pit were a microcosm of the lost fleet itself. Bertrand's voice was barely a whisper. This is the fate of those who failed. The fleet. Lost, trapped, maybe forever. Sir Roland nodded, heart heavy. And this is the test for us. To face it, to understand it, and to emerge without succumbing to fear. The trial began when the symbols along the chamber walls shifted, creating a pathway of light leading toward the center of the pit. As the knights stepped forward, the floor beneath them seemed to ripple, subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if testing their balance, focus, and resolve. Shadows within the pit began to move independently, forming figures that mirrored their worst fears. Lost comrades, vanishing ships, angry storms, and faceless hooded figures pointing toward them in silent accusation. One by one, the knights moved along the path, hearts pounding. Each step demanded attention, each movement measured. A single misstep could trigger unseen consequences. As they advanced, the guardians moved in unison, their silent vigilance a reminder of the price of failure. The air thickened, making every breath a conscious effort, and the hum from the pit grew louder, resonating with their very bones. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a massive form, a spectral ship rising from the depths of the pit. Its sails were tattered, its hull broken, and its deck filled with ghostly figures, the crew of the lost fleet, forever trapped between the world of the living and the world of the unknown. The ship tilted forward, threatening to plunge into the nights, but the path of light remained solid, a fragile bridge between them and the abyss. Henri trembled, whispering, This is what happened to them. This is our warning." Sir Roland grasped his arm, steadying him. "We cannot falter now. Step carefully. Observe. Respect the rules. Learn from what has come before." The knights pressed forward, each man confronting the shadows of failure and the ghosts of the lost fleet. The spectral ship seemed to follow their every move, rocking and swaying with an unnatural rhythm. The air filled with whispers, cries, and the faint sounds of waves and wind, as if the pit itself was a living echo of the sea that had swallowed their comrades. Fear threatened to consume them, but Sir Roland's steady voice and example kept them moving. As they reached the far side of the pit, they found a pedestal similar to the altars, but larger, more intricate, and radiating an overwhelming sense of power. Upon it lay a single object, a scroll, glowing faintly with symbols that shifted as they watched. This was no ordinary scroll. It contained the ultimate secret of the Templar fleet, knowledge of navigation, alliances, and the hidden rules that had governed their disappearance. It was both a gift and a curse. Sir Roland approached it cautiously. As he lifted the scroll, the guardians stepped closer, their presence almost oppressive. The hum from the pit reached a crescendo, and the shadows swirled violently, as though testing their worthiness. Every knight felt the tension, the weight of centuries of failure, and the knowledge that one misstep could claim them instantly. Then, a voice, soft, echoing, and older than time itself, filled the chamber. "Only those who respect the past, understand the rules, and act with wisdom may claim the knowledge. The others will join the lost." Sir Roland unrolled the scroll slowly. Symbols and diagrams revealed themselves, depicting hidden sea routes, storm patterns, whirlpools, and the secrets that had doomed the fleet. There were also moral instructions, warnings about greed, arrogance, and disunity. The knowledge was comprehensive, powerful, and dangerous. To wield it without understanding would be to invite destruction. The knights absorbed the contents in stunned silence. For the first time, they fully understood why the fleet had vanished and why the chest, the altars, and the trials had existed. The island had not been punishing them. It had been guiding them, testing them, and ensuring that only those worthy of the knowledge would survive. With the scroll in hand, Sir Roland turned to the men. "We have passed the third trial," he said quietly, awe and relief mingling in his voice. "We have faced the shadows of the past, confronted the fears that claimed so many, and learned the ultimate secret of the fleet. But our journey is not yet over. The island still watches, and the knowledge we carry is a responsibility, not a prize." The guardians receded into the shadows, silent but ever watchful. The spectral ship in the pit faded, leaving only the stone chamber and the faint hum of power beneath their feet. The Templars realized that the trials had prepared them not just to survive, but to understand the delicate balance between knowledge and consequence. As they stepped out of the chamber, dawn's light breaking across the island, the knights felt a mixture of triumph and caution. They had survived storms, whirlpools, disappearing ships, the chest of secrets, shadowed forests, and the heart of the island itself. But the lessons were clear: knowledge was power, but it demanded respect, wisdom, and unity. Misuse, recklessness, or arrogance would bring ruin. The third trial had ended, but the survivors knew that their journey back to the world beyond the island would not be easy. The sea that had swallowed the fleet still lay between them and home, and the secrets they now possessed would challenge everything they thought they knew about navigation, loyalty, and human endurance. And somewhere in the silent shadows of the island, the Guardians waited, patient and eternal, ensuring that only those worthy would carry the lost Templar fleet's secrets into the world again. The dawn light painted the cliffs in shades of gold and crimson as the surviving Templar knights prepared to leave the heart of the island. The third trial had been passed, the ultimate secret of the lost fleet claimed, and yet the weight of the knowledge pressed heavily upon them. Every man understood that possession of these secrets was not a reward. It was a responsibility, a burden that required wisdom, discipline, and vigilance. One misstep, and the fate that had claimed the fleet could claim them as well. Sir Roland led the group back through the forest, carefully retracing their steps. The shadows that had haunted the second trial were still present, but subdued, as if acknowledging the knights' understanding of the island's rules. The Guardians, ever silent, flanked them at a distance, ensuring that no deviation from the path would occur. Every movement was deliberate, cautious, and purposeful. They had learned that the island tolerated no arrogance, no recklessness, no disunity. As they neared the cliffs where their ships remained, the first signs of danger became apparent. The water below was churning violently, the calm they had observed upon arrival replaced by a violent tide. Currents twisted unnaturally, and foam sprayed against the jagged rocks. Sir Roland's eyes narrowed. The island is not done testing us. It will not allow our departure to be easy. Bertrand examined the sea, his brow furrowed. These currents, they match the patterns depicted on the scroll. Whirlpools, hidden channels. It's a trap, or a test, one last trial for those who survive the island itself. The knights prepared their remaining ships, inspecting every plank, sail, and rope. Each vessel was fragile, battered by the storms that had already consumed so many of their comrades. Henri, who had grown into a cautious but determined presence among the survivors, checked the navigation tools and scrolls from the chest. "We can survive this," he said quietly, "if we follow the instructions exactly. One mistake, and we join the fleet in the abyss." Sir Roland took a deep breath and began issuing orders. Every movement, every adjustment, every decision would require precision. They had survived the island's trials not through force alone, but through observation, discipline, and unity. The sea would demand the same. As the ships launched, the waters immediately tested their skill. Currents twisted unexpectedly, rocks appeared where maps suggested none, and waves rose higher than any they had encountered before. The survivors held firm, following the paths indicated by the ancient scrolls. Each turn, each adjustment of the sails, required complete concentration. A single error could throw a ship into a whirlpool, instantly consuming it. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the cries of gulls overhead and the roar of the violent sea. The survivors communicated with hand signals and careful shouts, guiding each other through the deadly channels. The ghosts of the lost fleet seemed to linger in the mist, reminding them of the consequences of failure. Every wave was a test, every current a warning, and the men understood that the ultimate lesson of the Templar fleet was unfolding before their eyes. Mastery of knowledge required mastery of action. Suddenly, a massive whirlpool appeared ahead, twisting violently, threatening to engulf the lead ship. Sir Roland's voice rang out. "Steer clear. Trust the path. Do not panic." The knights adjusted their sails and rudder with precision, guiding the vessel through the churning waters. Foam sprayed over the deck, waves crashed against the hull, and the roar of the whirlpool was deafening. Yet, step by step, they navigated the danger, hearts pounding, muscles straining, and minds focused entirely on the path the scroll had revealed. One by one, the ships passed the whirlpool, emerging on calmer waters beyond. The relief was palpable, but Sir Roland knew better than to allow celebration. The island's trials were far from over. The scroll had indicated further dangers, hidden reefs, deceptive currents, and unseen forces in the deeper waters. Every surviving Templar remained alert, aware that the knowledge they carried could save them, or doom them. As night fell, the fleet approached the edge of the island's influence. The waters gradually calmed, but the memory of the whirlpool, the shifting channels, and the spectral warnings of the forest and heart trials remained vivid. The island had released them, but not without ensuring that the knowledge they carried was earned and respected. During the night, Henri approached Sir Roland, holding the glowing scroll carefully. "The island, it tested us in every way," he said softly. "Not just courage or skill, but wisdom, unity, and humility. We were meant to learn, not just to survive. The fleet, it failed because it underestimated the power it carried. We understand now." Sir Roland nodded, gazing toward the dark horizon where the first stars of night appeared. "Knowledge is dangerous, but essential. We survived not because we are stronger than them, but because we learned what the fleet could not. And now, we carry both the responsibility and the secret. One misstep, and centuries of failure could repeat." The remainder of the journey home was tense but uneventful compared to the trials. The knowledge in the scroll guided them through hidden channels and currents, avoiding the traps that had consumed the fleet. The surviving knights worked together, coordinating their movements, adjusting their sails, and ensuring that no mistakes were made. The experience had bonded them irrevocably, forging unity from the crucible of fear and trial. As the first coastline came into view, the men allowed themselves a cautious relief. The sun rose over familiar lands, casting a warm glow over the waters and signaling the end of their perilous voyage. Yet even as they approached safety, Sir Roland reminded them of the lessons learned. "The island has released us," he said, "but the knowledge we carry is a responsibility. It is not a prize, and it is not ours to wield recklessly. We have survived, but the true test begins now: how we use what we have learned." The fleet docked safely, and the surviving knights disembarked, their legs weak but their resolve unbroken. The scrolls and artifacts were secured, their secrets preserved, and the story of the lost Templar fleet could finally be understood. Yet, Sir Roland knew that this knowledge would attract attention, envy, and perhaps danger. The lessons of the island, wisdom, unity, respect, and humility, would guide them, but the world beyond the island was another challenge entirely. The survivors of the fleet had not only reclaimed the ultimate secret but had also faced the consequences of courage, intelligence, and discipline. The island had tested them in ways no ordinary voyage could, and in doing so, had revealed the true price of power and knowledge. And as the last shadows of the island disappeared over the horizon, the knights knew one undeniable truth. The lost Templar fleet had vanished not because of the sea alone, but because it had failed to understand the rules of power. They had survived by learning them, and by respecting the forces that govern the unknown. The surviving Templar knights had returned to familiar shores, but the sense of relief was tempered by the weight of what they carried. They were no longer just survivors. They were custodians of a secret that had eluded men for centuries. The knowledge of the lost fleet was more than navigation, more than maps. It was power, wisdom, and responsibility bundled together, a treasure that could shape kingdoms or destroy them if misused. Sir Roland stood on the shore, watching the waves lap gently at the docked ships. For a moment, he allowed himself a breath of relief, feeling the solid earth beneath his feet. But the calm was deceptive. The island had taught them that knowledge came with rules, consequences, and vigilance. Every instinct in him told him that survival was only the first step. How they wielded the knowledge would determine their ultimate fate. Bertrand approached, carrying the scroll from the heart of the island. "The others will never understand the price of what we have learned," he said quietly. "The fleet was lost because they could not comprehend the responsibility. We have a chance to do it right." Henri, younger than the rest, nodded, his expression a mixture of awe and exhaustion. It's more than maps, more than routes. It's lessons, warnings, a code. The island didn't just test our skill, it tested our hearts, our unity, our respect for what we cannot fully control. The knights gathered in a secluded chamber to study the scrolls and artifacts more closely. The chest, which had once been a source of mystery and fear, now lay carefully secured. Every symbol, diagram, and relic was catalogued and cross-referenced. They realized that the knowledge contained not only the secrets of navigation and hidden sea routes but also strategies for avoiding natural disasters, understanding human behavior, and even political alliances that the Templars had maintained in secret. Sir Roland spoke gravely. We are the only ones alive who truly understand this. Every action we take with this knowledge will have consequences. If misused, it could destroy lives, kingdoms, perhaps even the balance of power in ways we cannot imagine. The men understood the stakes. The lost fleet had vanished because it had sought power without comprehension. They had survived because they approached knowledge with respect, humility, and discipline. But now, in the world beyond the island, the temptation of misusing that knowledge loomed large. Greed, envy, or carelessness could undo everything they had endured. Weeks passed as the knights documented every detail, recording lessons learned from the island, the trials, and the whispers of the past. Each scroll was transcribed, each symbol catalogued, each artifact studied. They were determined to preserve the legacy of the fleet, ensuring that future generations could learn from the mistakes of those who had vanished. But even as they worked, a quiet tension settled over them. They knew that knowledge is never contained. It spreads, attracts attention, and invites danger. One evening, as the sun set over the harbor, a messenger arrived from a distant kingdom. Rumors of the Templar fleet's disappearance had persisted for centuries, and now whispers of survivors had reached ears of those eager to claim secrets, treasures, and power. Sir Roland received the message with a grave expression. The world beyond the island was watching, and the trials of the sea and the island were only the beginning. The true test would be navigating the treacherous waters of human ambition, political intrigue, and envy. Henri voiced the concern shared by all. We survived the island, but what if the world itself is more dangerous? Sir Roland nodded. The island taught us lessons we must never forget. Unity, patience, respect for forces beyond comprehension. The sea claimed the fleet because it was unforgiving. The island tested us because we needed guidance. The world will test us because men desire what they cannot fully control. And we must be wiser than those who came before. The surviving knights made a pact. The knowledge of the lost fleet would be guarded, shared only with those who had proven themselves worthy. It was no longer just a map or a secret of navigation. It was a moral responsibility. Each man understood that the island had chosen them, not just for their skill, but for their ability to respect and wield power responsibly. Misuse would not only endanger them but also dishonor those who had vanished before. Months turned into years. The surviving knights used their knowledge cautiously, guiding fleets through treacherous waters, preventing disasters, and subtly influencing events to preserve stability. The secrets of the lost Templar fleet remained hidden from those who would exploit them recklessly. And yet, the burden was constant. Vigilance, discipline, and humility were required at all times. A single lapse could undo everything. The island, though far behind them, remained alive in their minds. The chest, the altars, the guardians, and the trials had not been random. They had been deliberate, testing their hearts, their unity, and their understanding. The lessons were clear. Knowledge was both a gift and a weapon, demanding respect, patience, and courage. Those who failed to honor its rules vanished. Those who succeeded carried the legacy forward. Sir Roland often reflected on the fleet, the island, and the trials. We survived because we learned, because we respected, because we acted with wisdom, he said to Bertrand one evening, gazing at the stars. The lost fleet is a warning. We must honor their memory by using what we know wisely, never letting pride or greed cloud our judgment. Bertrand nodded. The island was merciless, but it was also a teacher. And we We are its students. The knowledge we carry is powerful, but only if we remember the lessons. The moment we forget, we risk repeating history. As night fell, the knights looked to the horizon, aware that their journey was far from over. They had survived storms, whirlpools, the vanished fleet, the chest of secrets, the trials of the island, and the spectral warnings of the past. Yet the world awaited, full of challenges, temptations, and dangers that the island could not control. And so the survivors of the lost Templar fleet carried their burden with vigilance, wisdom, and humility, determined to honor the legacy of those who had vanished, to protect the knowledge that could save or destroy, and to navigate the delicate balance between power, responsibility, and human ambition. For in the end, they understood the truth the island had taught them. Survival alone was not enough. Knowledge without respect is perilous, and the cost of ignorance can be eternal. The surviving Templar knights had returned from the island, their bodies and minds scarred by the trials they had endured, yet strengthened by the knowledge they now possessed. But safety was an illusion. Though the island was behind them, the world beyond was unpredictable, dangerous, and full of men driven by ambition, greed, and envy. The ultimate trial had not ended, it had merely shifted. The battlefield was no longer the stormy sea or shadowed island, it was the human world. Sir Roland convened the group in a secluded hall, far from the docks and the bustling towns that lined the coast. Maps, scrolls, and artifacts were laid out before them. "We have survived the trials of the island," he said, voice steady, "and we carry knowledge that can guide fleets, prevent disasters, and shape the course of nations. But knowledge is a magnet for greed and ambition. We must be careful." Bertrand studied the scrolls, tracing routes and hidden currents. Rumors of the lost fleet's disappearance have persisted for centuries. Stories of treasure, artifacts, and secrets spread quietly. And now that we've returned, it will not take long for others to learn that survivors exist. Henri, younger but insightful, nodded. It won't just be sailors or scholars. Kings, merchants, warlords, they will all desire what we carry. The knowledge itself is power, and power draws attention. Their fears were soon justified. Weeks after their return, emissaries arrived from distant kingdoms. Couriers, disguised merchants, and even naval officers came seeking information about the Templar fleet. Each message was carefully worded, promising alliances, wealth, or favors in exchange for maps, secrets, and relics. But the knights quickly realized that these were no simple requests, they were tests of resolve. Every approach was a potential trap. One wrong move could result in betrayal, capture, or the misuse of knowledge they had fought so hard to earn. Sir Roland convened a council to determine their strategy. "We cannot reveal the scrolls or artifacts to anyone unworthy," he said firmly. "We survived the island because we respected its rules. The world beyond has no such rules. We must navigate carefully, with patience, discretion, and unity." The first real test came when a powerful merchant, claiming to have connections to the crown, arrived with promises of wealth and political favor. He demanded access to the scrolls, insisting that their secrets belonged to those who could wield them for the good of the kingdom. Henri, uneasy, pointed out the risk. "We cannot trust him. He may appear honorable, but ambition clouds judgment. The island taught us this lesson repeatedly." Sir Roland agreed. "We will not yield. The knowledge we carry is not a prize for the greedy. We protect it, and in doing so, we honor the legacy of the fleet that vanished before us." But threats did not always come from honorable sources. One night, a band of mercenaries attacked the knights' safehouse, attempting to steal the scrolls and artifacts. The knights fought with precision, using both skill and cunning. The knowledge of navigation and strategy gained from the island proved invaluable, not just for survival at sea, but in orchestrating defenses on land. The attackers were repelled, but the incident left the knights with a chilling awareness. The trials of the island were far from over. The real test was in safeguarding knowledge against human ambition and malice. Over the following months, the knights implemented strict protocols. The scrolls were divided, encrypted with codes known only to them. Artifacts were hidden, transported discreetly, or disguised. Only those who had proven unwavering loyalty and understanding were entrusted with fragments of knowledge. In this way, the legacy of the lost fleet could be preserved without endangering it. Yet the world beyond the island was relentless. Rumors continued to spread, and whispers reached ears capable of orchestrating wars and treacheries. Every encounter with a foreign envoy, every discussion in courtly circles, became a delicate negotiation. One wrong word could unravel decades of secrecy. The knights realized that survival was not just about courage or intelligence, it was about diplomacy, discretion, and restraint. Amid these pressures, Sir Roland began training the younger knights in the subtle art of discernment. Henri, Bertrand, and others learned not just maps and navigation, but also reading intentions, interpreting behavior, and understanding when to act and when to hold back. They internalized the island's lessons. Knowledge without wisdom was dangerous, and power without restraint was lethal. Then came the most challenging test. A coalition of ambitious maritime powers began probing for the fleet's secrets. Their spies, disguised as sailors and traders, attempted to infiltrate the knights' network. The knights' vigilance was tested to the extreme. Henri discovered coded messages hidden in shipments, Bertrand deciphered disguised maps, and Sir Roland coordinated countermeasures, ensuring that no piece of knowledge fell into the wrong hands. Every decision carried immense weight. The wrong move could spark war, betrayal, or disaster. Through strategy, caution, and discipline, the knights survived. Yet, unlike the island, the world was not bound by predictable rules. Each day brought new challenges, new temptations, and new threats. The Templars understood that the ultimate test of their journey was not simply surviving storms or puzzles. It was navigating human ambition, guarding secrets, and preserving the legacy of the lost fleet against forces far more unpredictable than the island itself. As the sun set over distant horizons, Sir Roland gathered the knights. "We have survived storms, islands, and trials," he said, voice calm but grave. "But the true challenge is before us, ensuring that the knowledge we carry does not destroy us or those around us." The fleet was lost because it lacked discipline, unity, and respect for power. "We will not repeat those mistakes." Henri, gazing at the flickering candlelight, asked quietly, "Do you think the world will ever understand the island's lessons?" Sir Roland shook his head. "Perhaps not. But understanding is not required by everyone. What matters is that we do, and that we act wisely, united, and with respect. Only then can the secrets of the Templar fleet serve as a tool for guidance, not a weapon of destruction." The knights settled in for the night, aware that vigilance would never end. The island had tested them, forged them, and entrusted them with power. The world beyond was a new trial, unpredictable and relentless. And though the seas had been conquered, the shadows of ambition, greed, and human desire now loomed larger than any storm, whirlpool, or spectral warning. Yet, in that moment, the surviving Templars felt a quiet certainty. They had been chosen not just to survive, but to preserve, protect, and apply the knowledge responsibly. And though the trials would continue, they were prepared, armed with the lessons of the island, the courage of survival, and the wisdom to navigate both the seas and the hearts of men. Months had passed since the Templar knights returned from the island, and yet the weight of their responsibility never eased. The world beyond the shores of the island was unpredictable, driven by ambition, envy, and greed. The knowledge of the lost fleet they carried, once a source of awe and wonder, had become a silent burden, constantly testing their judgment and unity. The first real consequence of wielding the knowledge came subtly, almost imperceptibly. A fleet under the command of a merchant prince had vanished in treacherous waters. The survivors' accounts hinted at mistakes that should have been avoidable if they had known the secrets of the Templar fleet. The knights quickly realized the cause. Someone had intercepted a fragment of their knowledge, an incomplete map, and attempted to use it without understanding the rules. The result was catastrophic. Ships were lost, lives destroyed, and the lesson of the island repeated for another generation. Sir Roland gathered the knights in a dimly lit chamber, the glow of torches reflecting on anxious faces. "This is the first warning," he said gravely. Knowledge misused is more dangerous than ignorance. The island tested us, but the world tests us differently. Our responsibility is not just to survive, but to ensure that no one else suffers the consequences of reckless ambition. Bertrand, studying the news of the lost fleet, clenched his fists. We thought keeping the knowledge secure was enough. But even fragments, even whispers, can be dangerous if misinterpreted. The island taught us to respect the rules. The world does not. Henri, his youthful face lined with worry, spoke quietly. We carry the lessons of the fleet, the trials, and the guardians. But the world does not listen. How can we protect what they do not understand? Sir Roland's eyes were steady, but his voice was firm. We cannot control ambition or greed, but we can guide, advise, and intervene where possible. We will ensure that any use of the knowledge is deliberate, cautious, and informed. That is our duty. That is our trial now. The knights knew that the first loss was a lesson. It was not punishment. It was a warning. The island had prepared them for storms, whirlpools, and shadows. Now, the trial was human ambition, and the stakes were just as high, if not higher. Every action, every decision, every revelation had to be measured against the consequences it might bring. Weeks later, another challenge emerged. A kingdom, hearing rumors of the lost fleet and its secrets, demanded access to the scrolls, offering titles, riches, and favor in return. The emissary's demeanor was courteous, persuasive, even flattering, but the knights recognized the danger immediately. Knowledge in the wrong hands, even with good intentions, could cause chaos. Sir Roland refused. He explained that the secrets were not for sale, not for favor, and not to satisfy curiosity. They were lessons, tools, and responsibilities, not prizes to be claimed. The emissary's anger was subtle, masked by diplomacy. Yet the knights understood that threats could escalate. One misstep could trigger political conflict, perhaps even war. They realized that safeguarding knowledge required vigilance, strategy, and sometimes ruthless discretion. They could not allow sentiment, loyalty, or persuasion to compromise the lessons of the island. Then came the moral dilemma. Henri discovered a coastal village in danger from hidden whirlpools and treacherous currents, exactly the kind of hazard the Templar fleet had once faced. The village was unaware of the danger, and lives were at stake. The knights debated, reveal the knowledge and save the villagers, risking exposure of the secrets, or remain silent and preserve the integrity of the knowledge. Sir Roland's voice was measured. The island taught us that knowledge is a responsibility. With great power comes the obligation to act wisely. But wisdom requires restraint, discernment, and unity. We must act, but we must also ensure that our actions do not create greater harm. After careful planning, the knights acted discreetly, sending subtle warnings and guidance to prevent disaster without revealing the full scope of the Templar secrets. The village survived, and lives were spared. Yet the event underscored the delicate balance they now faced. Knowledge could save or destroy, depending on how it was applied. The first consequence, the vanished merchant fleet, and the moral test of the village revealed the harsh truth. Surviving the island was only the beginning. The real trial was the world itself, the unpredictable, dangerous, and morally complex human landscape that tested their unity, judgment, and integrity. Every decision carried weight, and mistakes could have devastating consequences. Sir Roland convened the knights for reflection. The island prepared us for storms, shadows, and trials of courage. But the true trial is the world beyond. Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. Power without discipline is deadly. We must remember the lessons of the guardians, the altars, and the vanished fleet. Every action we take shapes not only our fate but the fate of countless others. The knights understood that the burden they carried was heavier than any storm, more complex than any puzzle, and more enduring than any enemy. The lessons of the lost fleet, the island, and the trials would guide them, but vigilance would never end. They were no longer just survivors. They were custodians, teachers, and guardians of a legacy that could not be entrusted to the unworthy. In the quiet moments before nightfall, Henri spoke softly, almost to himself. The first consequence. It was inevitable. Knowledge cannot be contained forever. But at least we learned from it, and perhaps we can guide the future better than those who came before. Sir Roland placed a hand on Henry's shoulder. Yes. And that is our purpose now. We survived the island, we learned the secrets of the lost fleet, and we endured the trials of the sea. But the ultimate test is here, in the world of men. Patience, wisdom, unity, and humility. These are the rules we must follow. Fail, and the consequences will be far worse than any storm or whirlpool. The knights looked out over the darkened seas, aware that their journey had entered a new phase. Survival was no longer the challenge. Understanding, applying, and protecting the knowledge was the true trial. The consequences of failure were now human, moral, and potentially catastrophic. And though the island remained a distant memory, its lessons were alive in their hearts, guiding them, shaping them, and reminding them of the price of knowledge. The months following the first consequence had been tense, each day layered with vigilance, calculation, and uncertainty. The surviving Templar knights understood that their true challenge was no longer the island, no longer the deadly seas. They were now navigating a far more dangerous landscape, human ambition. Whispers of the lost fleet, rumors of the scrolls and artifacts, and tales of the surviving knight's return had begun to spread quietly, reaching ears that hungered for power, wealth, and influence. Sir Roland convened the group in a secure chamber, maps and scrolls spread across a large oak table. "The world is changing," he said, his voice measured but firm. "We've survived storms, whirlpools, and the trials of the island. Now we face ambition, greed, and the cunning of men who will stop at nothing to claim what we carry. Every step we take must be deliberate." Bertrand, ever the strategist, studied a series of coded messages intercepted from foreign agents. "These are not simple inquiries," he said gravely. "They are reconnaissance, testing our defenses, probing our networks. If we slip, even slightly, they will strike." Henri, still younger than the others but growing into his role, added, "And they will lie, deceive, and manipulate. The island prepared us for truth in isolation, but the world thrives on deception. We must be vigilant, united, and disciplined." Their first confrontation came in the form of a powerful nobleman seeking to acquire one of the Templar scrolls. He presented a facade of courtesy, offering alliances, wealth, and protection for his kingdom. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay ambition, manipulation, and subtle threats. The knights recognized the danger immediately. Sharing even a fraction of their knowledge could result in chaos, conflict, and destruction. Sir Roland met the nobleman with calm authority. "The knowledge you seek is not a commodity, nor is it a tool for personal gain. It is a responsibility, a legacy. To misuse it is to risk the lives of countless men and women, as the lost fleet once learned. We cannot, and we will not, hand it over to those unworthy of its lessons." The nobleman's polite smile faltered. Threats, veiled as advice, followed. "Perhaps you misunderstand the value of what you carry," he said. "Power like yours, left unused, is wasted. The world will not wait for your caution." Bertrand interjected, voice steady but firm. "We understand the value. That is precisely why it cannot be entrusted to those who cannot respect the rules. The island tested us. We survived because we obeyed the rules. You have not." Frustrated and unable to manipulate the knights, the nobleman departed, but not without leaving a shadow of warning. There were others, more patient, more ruthless, who would pursue the knowledge with less caution. The Templars understood that this confrontation was merely the beginning. Weeks later, their vigilance was tested again. A coalition of merchants, spies, and naval captains attempted to coerce one of the knights, offering wealth and power in exchange for the location of the artifacts. The emissaries were skilled, persuasive, and persistent, preying on personal weaknesses, ambition, and fear. Henri recognized the subtle trap and alerted Sir Roland immediately. The knights orchestrated a countermeasure, exposing the deception without revealing any secrets. The attempt was foiled, but the incident reminded them that the consequences of exposure were immediate, dangerous, and potentially lethal. During a council meeting that evening, Sir Roland emphasized the stakes. The trials of the island taught us courage, unity, and humility. The trials of the sea taught us precision, patience, and respect for the unseen. The trials of the world test our judgment, our restraint, and our discipline. Every attempt to seize our knowledge is a test. Fail, and the cost will be catastrophic. Bertrand studied the scrolls, tracing routes, currents, and hidden passages. Even fragments in the wrong hands can cause disasters, he said. We cannot allow a single slip. One misstep could repeat history. Ships lost, lives destroyed, chaos unleashed. Our duty is to prevent that, even at personal risk. The moral weight of their responsibility grew heavier with each passing day. The knights understood that surviving the island had been only the beginning. Now the true trial was ensuring that knowledge was applied wisely, never recklessly, and always with consideration for the consequences. Each decision, each interaction with outsiders, was a delicate balance between protection, discretion, and strategic influence. As tensions rose, the knights realized that vigilance alone was insufficient. They needed to anticipate, to plan, and to act decisively when required. The island had trained them to endure fear, uncertainty, and temptation, but the world demanded more than endurance. It demanded foresight, cunning, and moral clarity. The coalition of ambitious forces did not relent. Attempts to infiltrate the Templars' operations, manipulate allies, and sow distrust continued, escalating the pressure on the knights. Every encounter was a test of character, strategy, and patience. Each man faced his own moral challenge: when to act, when to withhold, and how to balance the preservation of knowledge with the need to protect lives. Sir Roland gathered the knights one night, gazing at the stars above, reflecting on the journey from the island to this new battlefield. The island was merciless but fair, he said. The world is neither. The lessons we learned, unity, humility, respect for power, must guide every choice. We cannot control ambition, greed, or deceit, but we can control ourselves. That is our strength, and that is our responsibility. Henri, standing beside him, nodded. We survived storms, whirlpools, shadows, and trials that tested our hearts and minds. But this is the ultimate test. Not courage, not skill, not strength, but wisdom, restraint, and integrity. And failure here. Failure has a cost far greater than the sea could ever exact. The Templar knights understood that the stakes had risen. They were no longer merely survivors. They were guardians of a legacy, custodians of knowledge, and arbiters of power. The world sought to claim what they had endured so much to earn. Every encounter, every choice, every moment of decision would shape history itself. And as the nights grew longer and the threats more complex, the Templars remained vigilant, aware that the final trial, the ultimate reckoning of their courage, judgment, and integrity, was fast approaching. The world beyond the island had tested the surviving Templar knights in ways they had never imagined. No storm, whirlpool, or spectral shadow could compare to the challenges posed by human ambition, greed, and deceit. Every decision, every interaction, every fragment of knowledge they guarded was a trial of its own. And now, after years of vigilance, sacrifice, and moral struggle, the ultimate reckoning had arrived. Sir Roland convened the knights in the same chamber where they had first studied the scrolls after returning from the island. The glow of torches cast long shadows on the walls, echoing the memories of their trials: storms, whirlpools, shadows, and the island itself. Each knight bore the marks of experience: weary eyes, scars of battle, and the deep weight of responsibility. Yet there was determination, unity, and wisdom that no storm or enemy could erase. "The time has come," Sir Roland began, voice steady, resonant with authority. "The world has tested our resolve. Attempts to seize the knowledge, exploit it, or misuse it have grown bolder. And now we must face the final challenge: to secure the legacy of the lost fleet permanently, ensuring it survives not just as a tool, but as a lesson for generations to come." Bertrand laid out the maps, charts, and coded messages. The threats are many, and they are relentless. Every kingdom, every ambitious lord, every rogue fleet seeks what we carry. If we fail to act decisively, the knowledge could fall into hands that will destroy lives, ignite wars, or repeat the mistakes that doomed the fleet centuries ago. Henri, standing beside them, understood the weight of this moment more than ever. We have survived the island, the sea, the first consequences, and the pressures of the world. But this is the culmination. What we do now will determine not just our fate, but the legacy of the Templar fleet itself. The plan was meticulous. They divided the knowledge into layers, securing the most dangerous secrets in hidden locations, only accessible to those who had proven their worth. Artifacts were concealed in coded chambers, relics disguised among ordinary objects, and maps encrypted with intricate ciphers. Only the knights themselves, bound by loyalty, discipline, and understanding of the lessons of the island, held the keys to access the full knowledge. But action alone was not enough. The Templars knew that power without guidance was dangerous. They began cultivating allies, wise, cautious, and loyal individuals who could act as stewards of the knowledge in times of need. These allies were trained not just in navigation or strategy, but in the principles the island had taught: respect for power, humility in action, and the moral responsibility of wielding knowledge. The first test of their plan came swiftly. A coalition of ambitious merchants, rogue captains, and foreign spies attempted to intercept one of the hidden caches. But the knights anticipated this, using misdirection, coded warnings, and clever concealment. The attempt failed, and the would-be thieves departed empty-handed, unaware that the Templars had observed every move. The lesson was clear: foresight, preparation, and discipline were as vital as courage or strength. Sir Roland reflected on their journey. The lost fleet vanished not because of storms or sea monsters, but because men underestimated the consequences of knowledge and ambition. We survived because we respected the rules, understood the trials, and acted with wisdom. The world beyond the island is no different. Knowledge without restraint is chaos. Power without understanding is destruction. Months turned into years as the Templars maintained vigilance. The world continued to shift, kingdoms rose and fell, and ambitions waxed and waned. Yet the legacy of the lost fleet endured, not as a prize, but as a guide, a reminder of lessons learned through sacrifice and trial. The knights understood that their vigilance was eternal, but the purpose of their journey had been fulfilled. The knowledge, carefully safeguarded and wisely applied, would prevent history from repeating the tragic mistakes of the past. In quiet moments, Henri and Bertrand would walk along the docks, watching ships set sail under starlit skies. "It's remarkable," Henri said softly, "that something so powerful can survive if wielded carefully. The fleet, the island, the trials, it all led to this." Bertrand nodded. "And it will continue. The lesson is eternal. Power demands wisdom. Knowledge demands respect. And those who understand these rules can shape history, while those who ignore them perish." Sir Roland, observing them, added, "The island, the sea, the trials, they were never just obstacles. They were teachers. And we are their students. We have endured, we have learned, and we have passed the final test. The legacy of the lost fleet is secure, not in treasure or maps, but in the principles we uphold, the discipline we maintain, and the knowledge we protect." The knights, now custodians of centuries of wisdom, continued their work. They guided fleets, prevented disasters, and subtly influenced events to preserve stability. The knowledge of the Templar fleet remained a tool for guidance, not conquest. The world, unpredictable as it was, had been tamed not by force, but by understanding, restraint, and moral responsibility. Years later, as Sir Roland gazed at the horizon from a cliff overlooking the sea, he reflected on the journey from the first storm, the chest of secrets, and the trials of the island, to the complex and dangerous challenges of the world beyond. "We survived the island, the sea, and the consequences of ambition," he whispered. "And now we have ensured that the knowledge we carry serves its purpose: to guide, protect, and illuminate the future, rather than destroy it." The surviving knights, bound by trials, loss, and understanding, had transformed the story of the lost fleet from tragedy into legacy. The fleet that had vanished without a trace was no longer a tale of loss, but a monument to wisdom, courage, and the enduring power of knowledge used responsibly. And so the last echoes of the Templar fleet, its secrets, its lessons, and its legacy, remained alive in the hands of those who understood that survival alone was never enough. True triumph lay in the moral strength, unity, and wisdom to guide the future, ensuring that history's darkest mistakes would not be repeated. The seas were calm, the stars shone above, and the Templar knights, weary but resolute, continued their eternal watch, guardians of a legacy forged in storms, shadows, and trials beyond imagination.